Io passerei appunto immediatamente adesso la parola a Mark Stein. Il titolo della sua conference è particolarmente stimolante, è Eurozone War Trauma, How the Shadows of War Led to the Single Currency and Its Crisis. Avete nella cartella, Mark parlerà in inglese, avete però nella cartella il testo completo tradotto in italiano del suo speech, per cui vi lascio immediatamente la parola e welcome Mark to Milan.
We're running a bit late. Maybe I'll cut it a bit short.
No, you go.
See how we go.
I think this is important.
Okay. Can you hear? Yes. If it's not enough, good. È un grande piacere essere invitato a parlarvi oggi. Mi dispiace che il mio italiano non regge più di questa singola frase, ma di nuovo grazie di avermi invitato. Ora spero che il mio accento sudafricano non interferisca troppo se continua in inglese.
Very good.
Just a year before the 1999 launch of the euro, Paul Krugman, the American economist who went on to win the Nobel Prize, expressed his frustration about how criticisms of the plan for a single European currency had been ignored. For 7 long years since the signing of the Maastricht Treaty, he pointed out, critics have warned that the plan was an invitation to disaster. Milton Friedman, on the opposite side of the political spectrum, was another Nobel Prize-winning US economist who doubted the euro's viability. In a May 2000 interview, Friedman warned that there are real problems. When you see the differences between Ireland and Italy, you need different monetary policies for these two countries, but you can't have it with a single currency. Amongst US economists, Krugman and Friedman were by no means isolated voices. On the contrary, writing about American economists' doubts concerning the viability of the single currency, Van Overtveld notes that the most striking thing about the American criticism was that it came from all over the ideological spectrum. So widespread were these worries that in a review of 170 publications about the European single currency, Jornung and Dreher summed up the vast majority of American economists' opinions with an article entitled, "It can't happen, it's a bad idea, it won't last." It becomes clear in their review that after 1995, when the euro's start date was irrevocably fixed for 1999, US economists dropped the "it can't happen" theme and argued with increasing urgency, it's a bad idea and it won't last. Some of these economists predicted with considerable accuracy what was likely to go wrong. If we may be tempted to view this as an American conspiracy, these thoughts should be quickly abolished from our minds. Voices for opposition to the single currency were everywhere and went way beyond US shores. Lord Ralph Dahrendorf, for example, an eminent German sociologist, director of the London School of Economics, and at different times a member of the UK House of Lords and the German Parliament, argued for many years that the European Monetary Union was always a reckless project, dreamt up by politicians who failed to understand the crucial interplay of economic, social, and cultural issues. In a 1998 article, Dahrendorf argued that the shortly to be launched euro was divisive within countries, divisive within the European Union, and would divide Europe like nothing else since 1945. Voices of opposition were also expressed from within the very heart of the European project over a considerable period of time. From within the Bundesbank itself, the German central bank that has for many years played the key role in monetary policy formulation in Europe, a succession of senior officials consistently gave shrill and clear warnings about the inadvisability of the project. As far back as the early 1960s, Bundesbank President Karl Blessing argued that a single currency required a common trade policy, a common finance policy and budget policy, a common economic policy, a common social and wages policy, a common policy all round. Blessing's views represented much of Bundesbank opinion over many decades and was entirely ignored by those who went on to design the euro. In 1991, just a crucial year before the signing of the Maastricht Treaty, then Bundesbank President Karl Otto Pohl took up the argument again and delivered a stark rebuke to the European Parliament, warning that the single currency would be a disaster. Following Pohl, Hans Tietmeyer, Bundesbank President during the important years of 1993 to 1999, continued to voice the bank's concerns. In 1996, Tietmeyer pointed out that if European members were to tackle their problems in different ways and with different speeds, great problems will arise. With this introduction, I come now to formulate and explore the central questions on which this paper is based, and outline how my talk will proceed. The key questions that my paper focuses on are the following. If there were so many widespread doubts amongst economists and other experts around the world about the viability of the single European currency, why was the idea formulated? Why was it developed? And why was it implemented? And further, what have the consequences been of ignoring the advice of these experts? There is already a diverse literature on the origins of the Eurozone crisis. Within an already fragile global financial system, many commentators point out that the crisis has already threatened several Lehman Brothers moments of catastrophic breakdown. Although these issues move in and out of media spotlight, there's already a substantial body of opinion that no solution has been found. Indeed, some view the problems of the Eurozone as intractable, insolvable, and as likely to be as it has been likely to lead to a severe crisis in the global economy that could even eclipse both those of 1929 to 1933 and 2008. Some authors focus centrally on the link with the 2008 credit crisis, arguing that the deregulation of financial markets, coupled with reckless risk-taking by financial institutions that led to the 2008 crisis, have simultaneously created the problems within the Eurozone. Others, including Marsh, Begas, Van Overtveld, and Manopoulos, locate the problems further back in history and largely within Europe, and argue variously that an overemphasis on political interests, a misguided attempt to rival the United States, and an attempt by Germany to reassert its power played key roles in the background to the crisis. Many of these authors criticize the decision to create a single currency, but have little to offer by way of a deeper explanation for the decision to embark on such a high-risk venture. The best they can offer is that European leaders were motivated by political and not economic considerations, and that they were short-sighted and naive. But these ideas do not help us understand why these leaders took the decisions they did. In other words, the key question, why European countries went ahead with a single currency in the face of multiple unequivocal warnings by economists and other experts, remains largely unanswered. My aim is to fill this gap. I seek neither to blame nor to exonerate any individual or group. My aim is simply to try to understand, to advance our understanding of why the current very serious difficulties in Europe have come about, and to see whether we can learn anything from this. I argue that in order to get a serious grasp of these issues, we need to go back many decades and bring to mind the dark cloud that, following the devastation of the Second World War, hung over Europe in the latter half of the 20th century. I suggest that during a period of over half a century, in the lead up to the single currency, Europe was haunted by memories of this destruction. In this paper, I argue that the trauma of the devastation of war played a central role in distorting European leaders' capacity to make sound judgments and to take into account the concerns that were so clearly voiced by others. Thus, while much of the European integration movement was motivated by a healthy attempt to repair the wounds of the continent's bloody history, the decision to take the highly risky leap to create a single currency in the face of powerful arguments against it was governed by the trauma of war and its distorting effects. After this introduction, therefore, the sequence of my paper will be as follows. I begin by exploring the personal impact of the war on key European leaders involved in the creation of the single currency. I then move on to focus on the crucial period of the late 1980s to the early 1990s. This includes the period of the fall of the Berlin Wall, the collapse of communism, and the Maastricht Treaty. I argue that the trauma of war returned to have a profound impact on European leaders during this period, and that it hampered their capacity to make rational judgments. Moving rapidly on and noting briefly the early years of the euro following its launch in 1999, I then examined briefly the Eurozone crisis beginning in late 2009. By intensifying existing and old fault lines within Europe and via toxicity by creating a variety of new fault lines within the continent, I argue that the trauma of war has returned during the current crisis. Finally, I provide an overview and conclusion to the paper, including a further elaboration of the concepts I have used. I now turn to the personal histories of key European leaders because, I would argue, it was their wartime experiences that shaped their thinking and functioning later on in their careers. Excuse me. As the French and Germans played the key role in the European integration movement, I focus mainly on them. The trauma of the Second World War was deeply imprinted in the minds of a succession of French leaders. President Valéry Giscard d'Estaing, who played a part in the liberation of Paris, was one such leader. Following a 1977 ceremony meeting with his German counterpart Helmut Schmidt in the Alsace, Giscard admitted that he could not forget the war, the battles, the cruelty. Giscard was disturbed by a feeling that the ceremony with Schmidt did not represent the situation in an honest way, with the atmosphere of friendship, the handshakes, and the village band playing in the background when they arrived. He confessed that it was as though we were in a stage setting that had been quickly set up to hide the ruins, the rubble, the corpses. Giscard's successor, François Mitterrand, France's long-serving head of state and a central player in the development of the euro, was another. Born in 1916, the year of the Battle of the Verdun, Mitterrand fought in the Second World War, having been wounded and then captured by the Germans shortly after the fall of France, and being a German prisoner of war for 18 months. Mitterrand escaped, was recaptured, and then escaped again, returning to France in 1941, where he worked both for the resistance and the Vichy government. Deeply instilled with a sense of the tragedy of Franco-German history, Mitterrand acknowledged that as a young man, he could not pardon the damage of 3 occupations by Germany within a century, occupations that seemed to him to be a blasphemy. Although his anger diminished over the years, his memory of the war never left him. Then there was Roland Dumas, a close colleague of François Mitterrand, whose resistance fighter father was captured and executed by the Nazis. When Mitterrand came to power in 1981, Dumas told him that because of the tragedy of his father's early death, he felt unable to join the government and deal with the Germans. Mitterrand responded that precisely because of his family's history, he should take up a post and learn about the realities of modern Germany. Dumas went on to become France's European minister and later foreign minister, and has been described by the German foreign minister and vice-chancellor Hans-Dietrich Genscher as the real power in the background in the relations between France and Germany during the 1980s. The war also had a profound impact on key German leaders involved in monetary integration project. Chancellor Helmut Schmidt, who fought on the Eastern Front in the German Air Ministry and had been a prisoner of war in prisoner of war in 1945, was also burdened by the history of the war, both by the guilt for what the Germans had done to the Jews and to Europe, and also by the consequences for his own country and people. In 1987, he wrote that after Hitler and Auschwitz, the German political class cannot be considered for leadership. And as late as 2007, around the time of his 90th birthday, he exclaimed when talking about the German banks that the past is too present, the bloody past is too much present. Schmidt's successor, Helmut Kohl, who also played a central role in the single currency project, too was not spared the horrors of war. Kohl grew up in Ludwigshafen in western Germany near the French border, being a child of 9 when fighting broke out, and enlisting in the Ludwigshafen Fire Brigade at the age of 12. As well as his work in the Fire Brigade, the young Kohl was exposed to death and devastation in a more personal way when his older brother Walter was killed when an Allied bomber crashed into the ground in Ludwigshafen. Following Hitler's desperate attempt to boost the numbers in the military, Kohl was enlisted to train as a gunner at the age of 14. At the end of the war, he had to make his way hundreds of miles on foot from his posting back to Ludwigshafen, being beaten up by Polish forced laborers and witnessing the widespread destruction of his country on the way. Through much of his adult life, Kohl kept a home in the area near his birthplace, where in 1990 he invited US Ambassador Robert Kimmitt to visit. According to Kimmitt, Kohl took him into the garden and with an emotion-filled voice told him how the blood of the French and German soldiers had been spilled on all the land around. Other key leaders in the European integration movement were also strongly influenced by the war. Altiero Spinelli, a founding father of European integration, after whom the main European Parliament building is named, was deeply imbued by its legacy. Spinelli's Vento Team Manifesto, written in 1941 together with Ernesto Rossi, when the two were interned by Mussolini on the island of Ventotene, was a highly influential draft manifesto for a free and united Europe. Spinelli was released in August 1943 after 16 years in prison, a month after the overthrow of Mussolini. In sum, the multiple tragedies of war were seared into the minds of European leaders in a profound and deep way. The evidence suggests that not only have these memories remained active for a substantial period of time, but they've been handed down to later generations where they continue to have an influence. So I now turn to examine how this trauma influenced these leaders' thinking following the war. In most situations of severe trauma, those who have been traumatized are highly sensitized and alert to any possible repetition of what has unfolded. In post-war Europe, the fear of this repetition was most clearly focused on the Soviet Union, as well as, of course, about a resurgent Germany. As Nugent puts it, the Soviet Union became the perceived principal threat to democracy and stability in Western Europe, adding to the fear that was already felt about Germany. In what has become known as the double containment solution, that is, containment of both Germany and the Soviet Union, European leaders came to see that building Europe through an institutional architecture that tied West Germany into Western Europe was best for their own security. The hope was that this would stop a resurgent Nazi or fascist state, while simultaneously forming a bulwark, a protection against the threat of communist states led by the Soviet Union. As Winston Churchill put it in February 1949, the United Europe movement is the sole means of preventing another hideous war. Anxieties about the uncertainty of Europe's future and the possible resurgence of fascist states or the spread of communist states intensified during the latter half of the 1980s and the early 1990s. This period was witness to growing turbulence in Eastern Europe. In June 1988, during the early days of this turbulent period, European leaders put together a committee under Commission President Delors to study and propose concrete stages leading to economic and a monetary union. The Delors report of April 1989 that emerged from this was a highly problematic document. Bundesbank President Karl Otto Pohl, for example, who was a member of the Delors Committee, said that the report was a confused piece of work that contained some wild ideas. In spite of these shortcomings, the Delors report became the blueprint for European monetary union. While the idea of the single currency had been around for a long time, it took the chaos and anxiety of the late 1980s and early 1990s for it to result in a concrete program of action. With the fall of the Berlin Wall on the 9th of November 1989, the issue of German reunification leapt to the top of the East-West agenda. From within Germany, both East and West, there was enormous pressure on West German Chancellor Kohl to move quickly to unification. This was true especially in the East, where there was a rising clamour amongst ordinary East Germans for speedy bonding with the West. Responding to this clamour and acting in great haste, Kohl issued a 10-point plan to German unity a mere 3 weeks after the collapse of the wall. As well as the excitement felt by the Germans, this was a period of enormous anxiety for others. For the first time since 1945, Europe was in a position to recreate itself in a fundamental way, and all the worries concerning Europe's turbulent and bloody past came with it. Not only had Germany given rise to the most brutal dictatorship in history, but part of it had, for some 4 decades, been under communist rule. As well as the enthusiasm for new possibilities, therefore, the fears of European leaders were thus especially intense. It is perhaps no surprise, therefore, that, as Marsh puts it, as the move towards German reunification intensified, a Medici-like chronicle of rivalry, jealousy, bluff, and intrigue unfolded amongst European leaders. Accusations abounded of falsehoods, half-truths, and double-dealing. President Mitterrand at first was deeply antagonistic to the idea of German unification, which he referred to as a legal and political impossibility. When Mitterrand began to realize that the impossible was not only probable but unavoidable, he, together with European leaders, decided that a broader European monetary union was the only way in which German unification could safely proceed. The difficulty was that German political and economic leaders, as has been mentioned, had long argued precisely against such a currency, especially if it was to be undertaken in the absence of political and fiscal union. This reflected the views of the majority of Germans at the time. In the face of substantial pressure put on them, however, much of the German leadership were forced into a dramatic volte-face, turnaround. In the slipstream of the unification of Germany, argues Van Overtveld, French President François Mitterrand convinced German Chancellor Helmut Kohl into the acceptance of monetary union. In due course, perhaps because of their own traumatic history and the fears of Germany's destructive capability, many Germans came to accept this view. Kohl became a great adherent of the euro, telling a Belgian audience in 1996 that the euro and European unification were a matter of war and peace. Thus, the integration trade-off, a quid pro quo, that a single currency would be traded off with German unification, was established in the canons of European history. Putting it very bluntly, noted German economist Hans Werner Sinn declared that it was an open secret that Germany had to buy the consent of France by sacrificing the Deutschmark. The implications of this were highly problematic. As Van Overtveld has argued, the need to compromise politically resulted in economic inconsistencies and even outright fallacies in the architecture of monetary union. In sum, the integration trade-off was a highly problematic and risky one. And by insisting that Europe take a dangerous plunge into unknown waters of monetary integration, threatened to undermine the extensive work already undertaken in bringing Europeans together. By insisting on this trade-off, European leaders were unwittingly governed by shared traumatic ideas that placed the preclusion of the rise of belligerent warlike states at their center of their policy, whatever the cost, and regardless of views that suggested that this policy might achieve the opposite of what it was intended for. The 1992 Maastricht Treaty committed every European member state, unless it had been granted an opt-out, to relinquish their monetary sovereignty by 1999 at the very latest. Maastricht also included convergence criteria or qualifying criteria, including currency stability, low inflation, low interest rates, and the avoidance of high budgetary and national debt deficits that were intended to ensure that all participating countries could be relied upon for financial and budgetary diligence and prudence. The Maastricht Treaty can thus be understood as a fantasy document, to use the phrase coined by Lee Clark, that bears little connection to reality, I would argue. Central to the fantasy is the idea of convergence, the deluded notion of European states and citizens getting closer and closer together. In fact, European states and economies were nowhere near economic convergence. Importantly, the idea of convergence also evoked a cultural idea that was much wider than the economic idea and helped foster the delusion that Europe was on a road much like that of the United States just 2 centuries earlier. The truth is that Europe is vastly different from the United States. To take just one element, while the 13 colonies that made up the United States in 1776 were able to come together around the English language and create a reasonably homogeneous culture and identity, the European Union, by way of contrast, has 23 official languages, hundreds of minor languages such as Basque, Catalan, Corsican, Gaelic, Greco-Mirandese, Sardinian, and Taconian, and has always been a babel of countries speaking in different tongues that have distinct cultures associated with them. Another element of the Maastricht Treaty fantasy was the irreversibility of the single currency. Maastricht had no exit clause, and any new entrant into the European Union was automatically committed to joining the euro. A further fancy aspect was the no bailout clause, the fundamental rule that no country would bail out another one, enshrined in the rules of the treaty, which, as you all now know, was to be dramatically flouted by bailouts of around €500 billion to 5 separate Eurozone countries less than a decade and a half after the currency's launch. So I'll now move briefly on to the 21st century. During its first decade, the euro produced the illusion that it is a workable currency. The illusory nature of this idea is thrown into stark relief when we consider that functioning apparently well for around a decade during times of economic growth is no test for a currency that replaced old currencies that existed for many hundreds or even thousands of years. In various forms, for example, the Dutch guilder has existed for over 300 years, the French franc for over 600 years, and the Greek drachma for over 3,000 years. By way of contrast, the euro was in a catastrophic state of disorder a little more than a decade after its creation. While our worries about the eurozone wax and wane, there can be little doubt that no solution to the crisis has been or is likely to be found. Drawing inspiration from Freud's notion of the return of the repressed, I argue that because the trauma of war was not and could not be mourned, it returned in a different guise to haunt Europe at a later stage. Thus, the unfolding crisis has reopened old fault lines, such as the deeply held animosity between Germany and Greece. These divisions are multiplied by newer fault lines, such as those between the so-called PIGS group in the Eurozone. The acronym PIGS, referring to Portugal, Ireland, Italy, Greece, and Spain, was coined to refer to the European economies that were seen to be weakest and most in need of a bailout. Indeed, the toxicity of blame for the problems of the Eurozone spreads, leaving fractures and divisions between the Mediterranean countries, Greece, Portugal, Spain, and Italy, as well as Ireland. Nobody wants the humiliation and strictures of a bailout, and nobody wants to be one of the so-called pigs. Further, the toxic and endemic nature of the problems of the Eurozone led to the creation of other fractures between the former Eastern Bloc countries and the bailed-out countries, such as when Slovakia was forced to participate in a bailout for Greece, and so on. So I now turn to my overview, conclusion, and further elaboration of the concepts of this paper. Psychoanalysis and system psychodynamics have developed a conceptual framework for understanding the irrational forces that influence behavior and decision making. Using such a framework, I refer to the black cloud that hung over Europe as a traumatic memory of the forces that dominated the continent, and argue that the Eurozone project represented a desperate and flawed attempt to address this trauma by binding together previously warring nations. Put differently, the Euro was an attempt to exorcise history, a history stained with centuries of conflict and spilt blood, and prevent its repetition by creating an ill-advised single currency union in defiance of known rational considerations. Thus, while European integration during the first half of the century following the war had brought considerable benefits, the single currency was a step too far, more like a dangerous leap into the unknown, that risks undermining all the work that had been done towards the ambition of European integration at earlier stages of the process. As well as drawing on the well-established psychoanalytic idea of traumatic memory, I introduced the term gang state to give shape to that which, by being capable of continuing Europe's bloody history, most powerfully evoked such a trauma. My central source of influence in developing the term gang state is the work on the gang by the psychoanalyst Herbert Rosenfeld, work that I've discussed elsewhere in relation to another context in a paper I wrote with Jonathan Pinto. Excuse me. Drawing principally on Rosenfeld's work, I introduced the idea of the gang state to give shape to the notion of a state that has reacted to its own traumatic history by developing an extreme philosophy and a violent way of functioning. The gang state radically splits human characteristics into wanted and unwanted aspects. Excuse me. Denigrated, unwanted aspects are then projected into those outside the gang state, while heroic, wanted aspects are projected into parts of the gang state and the gang leaders in particular. Although Horton does not refer explicitly to gangs or gang states, his description of a group harboring intense feelings of denigration, competition, hatred, prejudice, and paranoia, and believing that it represents something good and that others represent something inferior, characterizes this projected process well. The gang state thus involves the apparent exporting of its problems by projective identification in an attempt to protect itself from its vulnerability and bolster its power. The gang state embodies the contradiction that it promotes the ideals of disciplinarian authority and rigid adherence to certain core values, while at the same time celebrating immoral acts that are aimed at the gang state's enemies. Acts of delinquency, brutality, and corruption are therefore celebrated, rewarded, and idealized, so long as the people who suffer as a consequence of these activities are those who are seen to be the gang state's enemies. These acts of delinquency may become institutionalized, with government departments, police, and military being formally authorized and rewarded for carrying them out. Regarding its leadership and consistent with its culture, the gang state therefore celebrates and promotes inappropriate and often tyrannical individuals to senior leadership positions. As the leaders are the recipients of the extreme of the wanted and heroic characteristics of the gang, they become dominant and exercise a tyrannical hold over these gang members. This tyranny ensures that, as Rosenfeld puts it, gang members will not desert the destructive organization or betray the secrets of the gang. These leaders exercise highly rigid and disciplinarian forms of control in order to ensure that, to borrow again from Rosenfeld, members support one another in making the criminal destructive work more effective and powerful. Further, in setting delinquent behavioral examples to others, the gang state leaders contagiously spread the culture of their own misdemeanor. The gang culture is deepened because these leaders recruit others, often with delinquent tendencies similar to their own, to enact certain gang functions for them. The gang culture is thus communicated and maintained by many people and not the leaders alone. The gang state may develop the idea that its survival depends on the destruction of these other individuals or groups, and this may become an idea fix which the gang state becomes obsessed about and concerning which it will not relent. This culminates in the destruction of these others. Stein, for example, writes of gangs that are experts in revenge and promise the destruction of enemies. While this promise may well be fulfilled, this is undertaken in an absence of any awareness of the ethical issues as well as the wider problems, including for the gang itself, that may be created. In relation to Europe, I argue that the trauma of the gang state was deeply and profoundly felt in relation to the events of the Second World War, and specifically the series of events that resulted from the highly destructive and perverse extremes of Hitler's Germany. Although I do not have time in this presentation to develop this idea, I would, however, argue that this traumatic collective memory was not exclusively one of German nationalism, German state, and the rise of the Nazis, but one that was also evoked by the rise of fascist and totalitarian gang-like tendencies that emerged widely in Europe, especially in Greece, Spain, Portugal, and Italy. In other words, the gang state was problematic and traumatic for European leaders, not only because it existed in countries other than their own, but also because it had been present in varying degrees and continued as a residual threat in their own countries. While I've also not had time to look at this in detail today, I'll argue that these anxieties were also profoundly evoked by the rise of communism that reached its most frightening peak in Stalin's totalitarian Soviet Union. Indeed, while post-war Europeans continued to fear a resurgent Germany during the Cold War, the gang state baton was simultaneously passed on to communist Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union in particular. The fact that the genesis of the euro in Maastricht 1992 occurred in the immediate aftermath of the 1989 fall of the Berlin Wall and the collapse of the Eastern Bloc and Soviet Union between 1989 and 1991 suggests that the idea of newly independent East European states, as well as a reunited Germany, re-evoked these traumatic memories and strengthened the flight to convergence and unity. In other words, the breaching of the Berlin Wall effectively reopened the wounds of war, intensifying the fears of the return to the years of spilt blood and conflict. These memories may be understood as the impact of a traumatic recollection of gang-like tendencies within European states that has, at various times and in various locations, idealized and celebrated sadistic, corrupt, and perverse behavior, acted in a highly destructive way to locate allies who were brought into the fold by invasion, bribery, threats, and bullying, and identified enemies who were then deceived, brutalized, and sadistically destroyed. This argument is not in any way to suggest that Nazism and fascism are somehow the same as East European and Soviet communism. My argument is rather that whatever the differences between them, and there are of course clearly many important differences between fascism and Nazism and communism, at a primitive level, the traumatic collective memory of the excesses of all these systems evoke the same core fear within Europe, that of the renegade gang state, a state that posed an ever-present threat of war, domination, destruction, and death. In this attempt to address the trauma, sincere and well-motivated attempts to repair the damage caused by war thus inclined European leaders to seek much greater unity amongst European states than was economically or politically appropriate. To create structural conditions that rightly belong to a state and apply them inappropriately to a group of states, and justify overlooking key problems or taking illegal measures to ensure that potential members join up with the new union. Using terms such as convergence to bolster the illusion of similarity, substantial differences regarding social, cultural, and linguistic issues, differences in demographics and size, and differences in economic, banking, and fiscal systems between the Eurozone countries were vastly underestimated or overlooked, leading to the somewhat spurious idea of economic integration and the creation of a single currency, the euro. Although a degree of economic and political integration was important and indeed essential for post-war Western Europe, the flight from this traumatic memory inclined European leaders to engage in a highly dangerous degree of integration that created many more problems than it solved. Indeed, the single currency was not just another step along the way to integration, but a vast leap into uncharted territory that involved a highly dangerous blurring of boundaries and confusion around the idea of national sovereignty and identity. Psychoanalysis, and especially the psychoanalytic study of trauma, casts a powerful light on this scenario. The traumatized state of mind, whether at individual or group level, may face overwhelming difficulties that cannot properly be dealt with. Further, the transgeneration transmission of trauma can result in deeply painful and traumatic memories or distorted versions of them being vividly present in the minds of later generations, as if time itself has collapsed. The traumatized individual or group may operate defensively and unthinkingly by searching for an idealized solution that will save it from its difficulties. Involving flight from the problems it faces, one possible solution may be found in the creation of a world that is quite the contrary of the world that is being fled from. In some cases, this idealized new world may involve the notion of merging with and thereby neutralizing the source of its fears. In the case of Europe, it was felt that centuries of division and war would be cured by the unification and fraternity, especially if it involved the inclusion and thereby neutralization of Germany, the country most feared. A central difficulty here is that hinging on flight from traumatic memory of war, the solution veered to the opposite extreme, leading to an ill-advised union that was fraught with problems and ran counter to known rational considerations. Drawing on the ideas of the psychoanalyst Melanie Klein, this can be understood as a manic response because it involves the deluded idea we can pacify our enemies by embracing them, of a manic triumph over Europe's deep divisions. Such a response implied a kind of manic denial, whereby fully aware of and highly focused on the tragedy of war and Europe's historic divisions, European leaders delude themselves into believing that their bloody history could be overcome by a unification of formerly warring parties. Unlike the more familiar concept of denial that implies overlooking or ignoring contrary evidence, manic denial involves being highly focused on that evidence, but in a triumph of hope over experience, to borrow the phrase of Samuel Johnson, being lured into the delusion that such problems could be cured. I thus argue that the design of the euro was flawed and that this faulty design, a so-called technical problem, was the result of much deeper human issues. I also argue that this tragic history gets played out in the current unfolding of the Eurozone crisis. The irony is that, in an attempt to avoid the destructive and catastrophic fracturing that was witnessed in Europe under the domination of Hitler's Germany, different kinds of fracturing, such as those between North and South, East and West, or core and periphery of European countries, are being created. I therefore argue that the shadow has returned in a deep and profound way because the original trauma was not, and indeed could not be, properly thought about or mourned. The single currency being a solution that involved a manic denial of the deep and economic and political differences in Europe, thereby becomes the wellspring of disharmony amongst European citizens. The seeds of disharmony between these countries are therefore sown. While the Eurozone's woes go in and out of the political and media focus, the underlying problem has not gone away. That which has been denied, the long and acrimonious history of Europe, has returned and will return again, as Freud would have it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark, for your speech. I think you raised really great issues. It was, in my opinion, at the same time, brilliant, provocative, and moving. So I know we are running a bit late, but I think it's very important to discuss your all the issues you raised. So we're going to take 15 minutes more to give to everyone the possibility to ask Mark questions. Credo che sia necessario, dopo con lo speech di Mark, prendersi almeno 15 minuti in più per discutere tutte le questioni importanti, credo. E una cosa che mi ha particolarmente colpito è la lucidità con cui è riuscito a mettere insieme un'analisi economica molto precisa e sintetica degli ultimi 50 anni e alcune come dire, emozioni molto molto forti come illusione, fantasia, vergogna e soprattutto, credo, nell'ultima parte, questa idea di mourning, di lutto non elaborato. Lascerei appunto alle domande e a voi la possibilità di fare qualche domanda a Mark.
In italiano o in inglese, è indifferente.
Posso?
Certo.
Sì, oggi in italiano, se no mi impasticcerei. Sarei chiaro. Il punto di vista interessante che merita di essere meglio compreso risente del fatto che l'osservatore, l'autore di questa brillante analisi è un inglese o comunque di cultura anglosassone ed è fuori dal gioco delle vicende affrontate, Francia, Germania, i fascismi, la storia europea. Non è una critica, è una domanda di tipo epistemologico. Che peso ha? È un vantaggio guardare da fuori? Voi non siete nella zona dell'euro e sappiamo la posizione un po' borderline della Gran Bretagna rispetto al tema unificazione europea e moneta unica. È un vantaggio o è uno svantaggio anche tipo analitico? Grazie.
Posso aggiungere la domanda che è sempre fa riferimento? Volevo chiedere, da questo punto di vista di questa analisi, perché l'Inghilterra non è inclusa in questo trauma? No, sì, ma perché non hanno... Cioè, proprio perché la motivazione per cui sembra che l'Inghilterra non abbia... non sia stata inclusa in questa analisi, quindi o abbia elaborato il lutto e quindi se ne sia tenuta fuori, oppure qual è la motivazione per cui non l'ha subita sostanzialmente.
Raccogliamo magari un'altra domanda e poi lasciamo a Cinzia e a Mark la risposta. Una sola, direi.
Il talk del signor Stein sembra un obituary, sembra ma l'euro è ancora vivo, non è ancora morto, non è collassato. Quindi mi sembrava proprio un obituary. But it is still kicking and alive.
chiedo scusa.
Prego.
Allora, io sono uno che è qui per caso, perché non sono uno psicologo, non sono un ingegnere, quindi figurati. Però ho una percezione un po' diversa e quindi volevo verificare quanto fosse stupida la mia posizione, ecco, ma eventualmente modificarla. La mia percezione è di un'altra natura, e cioè, in fin dei conti, se vogliamo proprio tornare indietro, dovremmo tornare alla politica coloniale dei vecchi stati. In questa politica coloniale ciascuno ha cercato una espansione, un'affermazione sui mercati, un proprio potere rispetto a tutto il resto dell'universo che aveva un peso all'epoca. Il risultato che cosa è stato? Il risultato è stato che le realtà locali hanno in realtà trovato la strada per la loro indipendenza, per la loro autoaffermazione e quindi hanno costretto gli stati europei a rientrare nei loro margini. Questo ha creato, sì, certamente un altro tipo di trauma e ha mantenuto invece localmente dei presidi che non erano dei presidi tanto politici, solo in parte, in minima parte, ma soprattutto economici. Questo ha generato quelle realtà precedentemente occupate e ancora in qualche misura occupate ancora da entità di tipo commerciale e economico, però quella trasformazione che nel tempo li ha fatti chiamare stati emergenti. Questo ha determinato quella situazione che adesso noi conosciamo come globalizzazione, non ne sono questo naturalmente, sì. Però il problema degli stati in loro stessi e l'emergenza, l'evidenza di questa globalizzazione ha certamente provocato problemi di identità. Quando nascono questi problemi di identità si tende normalmente a riaffermarla con una certa forza e qui posso legarmi a quanto veniva detto prima, cioè quindi all'emergere anche dei traumi eccetera, però lo vedo come una conseguenza, non tanto come un'origine. Ecco, questo volevo chiedere.
Grazie, risponderei prima alle prime 3 domande che mi sembra che abbiano un filo conduttore e magari poi riprendiamo questa ultima. Se puoi tradurre.
So the first three questions basically your point of view as a UK person. So the first question was, does your Anglo-Saxon culture influence your point of view, first of all? And do you consider that an advantage point or a disadvantage point? The second question is very much linked to this. And it is, why is the UK not included in your analysis? Are you outside of this problem? And is that why you elaborated did you mount the problem or not? And the third is more like a statement, yes. And because yours seems like an arbitrary sort of mounting of the euros, but the euros is still there. So what's your point of view? The other question is a little bit more complicated, so we can.
Okay, thank you very much for these very interesting questions, which I'm very pleased to take. I won't speak for long because I have already spoken for a long time, so I would rather hear you, but I will respond briefly. I'm not British. I'm South African. Yes, I do live in England, and one could argue that that shapes my view. I would like to believe I would have this view wherever I live. My wife happens to be German, actually, and a lot of our friends are from Germany, Italy. So, I consider I'm not quite sure where my home is, let me put it that way. And I'm not sure I locate myself squarely within Britain. I think one of the real tragedies of the debate in Britain is that somebody like me gets cast as anti-Europe. I'm anti-Europe, I'm anti-integration, this is what people would say about me. and I think it's wrong. That I don't believe in the European project, that I believe it's better for Britain to be outside of Europe, and I think that's very unfortunate, because people like a kind of a black and white situation. They like you're pro-Europe or you're anti-Europe. There's no grey area, and I think that is unfortunate. I'm very much in favour of the European integration project. I believe that much of the European integration movement that happened for the first 4 decades after the war was incredibly important. I believe the European Union is incredibly important. I think it would be a tragedy if Britain left the European Union, and I'm very much in favour of all of that. My argument is that the single currency is a completely different matter. And my argument is that the issues around the currency, which I tried to elaborate, suggested that this was a much more dangerous activity than any of the earlier steps that were taken towards European integration. The question about mourning, should we be mourning this, or what is my take on it? My take on it is very simply that I don't think that Britain mourned this. That's not the reason why Britain stayed out of the euro, so that's not my argument. And I don't take any pleasure from saying that, Britain's outside of the euro. It's just the way it is. My view is very simply that, unfortunately, I believe the euro was a mistake, and I think the evidence is there, and if it's not there enough now, it will be there in the future. So the answer would be, in the service, in the commitment to European integration, European countries should disband the euro carefully and thoughtfully and recreate the old currencies, because the euro has become the issue that's tearing Europe apart. And I know it's a bit quiet, been quiet for a few months, perhaps not in Italy in the last week, but it's been quiet in Europe for a few months. That's just a temporary lull. It will come back. And the issues we saw last year, which were really quite traumatic, Europe fragmenting apart, will come back, precisely because the single currency just doesn't work. It doesn't allow countries in difficulty to have their own currency and therefore to devalue when they need to. It doesn't allow them to pursue their own economic policy, and therefore my argument is that it should be disbanded carefully, thoughtfully, and the old currencies reinstated.
Ok. Allora, ha pensato di rispondere brevemente perché gli piacerebbe lasciare spazio a voi per altre domande. Prima di tutto ci tiene a sottolineare che lui è sudafricano, vive, è vero, in Gran Bretagna, ma appunto ha questo background, e sua moglie è tedesca e lui ha molti amici sia dalla Germania sia dall'Italia, quindi tendenzialmente lui non si considera un britannico, considera la sua posizione indipendentemente appunto dall'essere una persona che vive in Gran Bretagna. La tragicità di questo aspetto è che molto spesso viene considerato anti-europeo. In realtà questo è un errore, perché lui non si considera anti-europeo, non pensa di essere anti-europeo. In realtà molto spesso le posizioni contro Unione Europea e contro euro vengono viste come un bianco o un nero, no? O sei anti o sei pro. In realtà dovrebbe esistere anche una zona grigia. Lui è assolutamente a favore dell'integrazione europea e pensa che l'uscita dell'Inghilterra, della Gran Bretagna dall'Unione Europea sarebbe una cosa tragica. Però la sua posizione invece sull'unione monetaria è completamente diversa. Il tema del lutto, allora, la Gran Bretagna non è fuori dall'euro perché ha elaborato o non ha elaborato il lutto, questo è tutto un altro discorso. Lui semplicemente in questo suo scritto, insomma, esprime la sua posizione rispetto all'euro, che appunto secondo il professor Stein è stata un grave errore, e che appunto l'impegno dei vari paesi europei nei confronti dell'euro sta diventando un fattore di divisione. L'anno scorso questo aspetto si è evidenziato molto fortemente, in questo momento ci sono altri aspetti che sono all'ordine del giorno, però secondo lui questo tema tornerà in auge, perché tendenzialmente l'euro non funziona, perché il singolo paese, soprattutto in un periodo di crisi come questa, non può svalutare la moneta, non può seguire la sua politica economica indipendentemente dagli altri. Per cui la sua posizione è quella che sarebbe raccomandabile, insomma, gradualmente lasciare l'euro e tornare gradualmente, ovviamente con tutte le cautele del caso, e tornare gradualmente alle vecchie monete, insomma.
We have another question that was asked for one of the participants, and I think raise a wider option, because he asks about this phenomenon of division was maybe started from the colonial domination that was made by all the European countries, and not only the European countries, in the 18th century, and maybe they have a strong influence on the process of globalization and on the role of the emerging countries in this much wider landscape.
I'm sure that if you studied the history of colonialism, I'm sure that you'd find many important links between what happens today and what happened many centuries ago. But for my part, the most important influence on the European integration movement and the creation of the single currency was the war and what happened within Europe. And that's the focus of my talk. But I'm sure that there's another talk to be made by somebody who wanted to address the influence of colonialism.
Credo che adesso possiamo raccogliere magari un altro, almeno 3 domande, se c'è.
Sì, allora Max Stein dice che sicuramente ci sono dei forti link tra ciò che succede oggi e le conseguenze del colonialismo, quindi con un occhio storico sicuramente ci potrebbe essere degli approfondimenti da fare su questo tema. Per lui oggi però il focus è sul tema della seconda guerra mondiale, che per lui è appunto il tema centrale, e quindi appunto si limita a questo.
My question is related to the fact that maybe the cause of the current situation, the current difficulties in Europe, may be also related to the fact that we have a new generation of leaders that probably do not remember what's happened during the Second World War, such as, for example, François Hollande, Angela Merkel, so people that have not a strong memory of the past, so they can't push or they can't find the reason of the Union, the European Union, or maybe more about the Europe.
La mia domanda è relativa alla tematica della negazione maniacale. Non l'ho ben capita o mi lascia in qualche modo perplesso, no, questo aspetto. Vorrei un attimino, magari fosse meglio delineata questa rielaborazione maniacale. La seconda domanda, che si collega a quello che ha detto prima, è la prospettiva di uscire dall'euro come soluzione alla maniacalità. Mi chiedo, non ci sono altri percorsi che possono introdurre una dimensione più realistica dell'Unione Europea, quindi una dimensione più politica, una dimensione di migliore governance dell'assetto europeo?
C'è un'altra domanda e poi passiamo alle risposte.
Yeah, Mark, building on the first question, I think I would like to have your opinion about how much the lack of leadership, lack of ability of dreaming of our leader today in Europe the economical crisis is playing into your analysis. So with in different words, with different leaders, with people able to dream, without the current crisis, wouldn't be the picture be totally different?
Rapidamente, apprezzo molto il metodo perché utilizza lo strumento psicoanalitico soltanto in alcuni passaggi e per cercare di dare un senso all'irrazionalità di alcuni comportamenti, mentre il resto del ragionamento è di tipo storico-economico. Secondo, ho vissuto questa storia dell'euro anch'io come una forzatura e sono grato di questa tesi della maniacalità che a me sembra molto comprensibile, però devo dire di averla percepita allora più come una furbizia che come una maniacalità, cioè un escamotage, l'imbocco di una scorciatoia per arrivare a un'integrazione evitando i problemi duri, di affrontare prima i problemi duri dell'integrazione. Credo che le due interpretazioni siano complementari, non sono necessariamente in contrasto l'una con l'altra. Terzo, anche se l'analisi è giusta, l'ha già detto Giancarlo, può darsi che sulla terapia non siamo d'accordo. Secondo me il tema dell'integrazione è il tema serio e difficile e anche questo contributo ci aiuta ad affrontarlo in termini più realistici e meno illusori. Grazie.
Io darei una risposta prima alle due domande che sono state poste in inglese, Cinzia se puoi brevemente riassumerle, che sono anche un po' collegate, e poi facciamo le altre due.
So, can you please answer first? And then I'll translate the last two which are
put in English.
clear.
Sure.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so the one question was about the new generation of leaders, and my own take on this is that the difficulty is that leaders today are saddled, European leaders today are saddled, they are trapped by decisions that were taken in the 1990s. What was decided on during the 1990s, the Delors report, the Maastricht Treaty in 1992 set in stone what happens in Europe today. And so that is really the focus of my talk, because it seems to me that however creative, innovative, thoughtful, unburdened modern leaders are in Europe, they are trapped by the same difficulty which was created some decades ago. And it's the economic realities of that they can't escape. Your country gets into difficulty, you can't devalue because you don't have a currency. That is a traditional way of getting out of economic difficulties, as has happened in countries like Argentina. You devalue and you then reconstitute. Greece can't do that. Portugal can't do that. And so these are the consequence of the decisions of leaders in the 1990s. And my view is that, sadly, I don't think, however creative leaders are today, I don't think they can address that unless the euro was to be rethought. The other question, which I think had links with that, which is also about the euro, the recent crisis, the economic crisis, and also a bit about innovative leaders. Once again, I don't think that new creative leaders are going to be able to address these problems unless this fundamental structural issue is rethought. I do think that the economic crisis has played into this very clearly. 2008 and all that happened then paved the way for the Eurozone crisis. But one shouldn't use that as an argument to say that, well, it's just unfortunate we had a global economic crisis, and if not, the euro would be fine. Because we have to think in the long term. At some point in the history of a currency, there will be crises. There are always crises. They come back and forth. So if the euro can't survive its first crisis, or if it's in serious trouble within 15 years of its creation after one major crisis, then you have to think, you know, it's not something just about that crisis. It's about the currency's difficulty in withstanding crises, which may happen again and again.
Ok, per quanto riguarda il tema dei leader europei, secondo il professor Stein, i leader di oggi sono intrappolati dalle decisioni prese negli anni 90, per cui di fatto, per quanto essi possano essere creativi e pieni, insomma, di risorse, si ritrovano intrappolati, non possono sfuggire e non possono fare ciò che è stato tradizionalmente usato come uno strumento per uscire dalla crisi, come per esempio nel caso dell'Argentina recentemente, ovvero la svalutazione della moneta. Quindi diciamo il punto di Mark Stein è che se non si toglie appunto questo ostacolo che è rappresentato dalla moneta unica europea, questi appunto nuovi leader non possono, né da un punto di vista tecnico né probabilmente anche da un punto di vista appunto più immaginativo, creativo, affrontare queste crisi. Quindi diciamo che il tema della crisi è ricorrente nell'economia mondiale e se solo da 15 anni dopo la creazione dell'euro si entra in una crisi come questa, è molto difficile pensare che appunto l'euro possa avere vita lunga.
Le domande?
Le altre due domande da tradurre.
Allora, nelle altre due domande si parla
English.
Switch to English. Okay. Yeah, the theme is the maniacal negation.
Right.
Okay. So the first question is if it's possible to elaborate better this point, and the second question is there any other ways to get out of the problem of the crisis apart from dropping the euro, maybe with a better governance or with a better, European asset and so on. The second question, the man says he appreciates your method for addressing the problem, partly from a psychoanalytical point of view, but also in a great part from a historical and economical point of view. So he also asks about the maniacal theme issue, and he points out that in his opinion it could be that the creation of the euro was more of a shortcut toward integration. Instead of being, a maniacal thing, it was something, a shortcut, something to get easier this point. And he also points out that maybe there are other ways of exiting the crisis apart from dropping the euro.
Right.
And
okay, I think that's fine. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so I will try to address very briefly these other points. The first one is about the manic nature of the decision to adopt a single currency. That's my argument, that it was a manic decision. And there are, of course, different ways to understand this. You could understand it differently, but this is my way. That if you think about what people like Francois Mitterrand had gone through, and Helmut Kohl, and all the other leaders. These are people who had suffered terribly deeply. They had been wounded personally in the war. And many of them as young men had felt they could never forgive and never forget. So the kind of sense of the history of the tragedy of war was deeply imbued in them. These men are saying, we're going to get over the bloody history of Europe by becoming one. We're going to embrace our enemy. We're going to bring our enemy to us. And to me, that's a manic denial, because the tragedy of Europe is that we have been friends and we have been enemies at different times. And to try to become one, to pretend that we are one entity, one country, which is what is implicit in the idea of a single currency, we're becoming one country. It's not to say, I'm not saying there's no such thing as friendship in Europe, there's no such thing as affection, respect, and some common feeling. Of course, there's common European feeling. But this notion of one currency, bringing with it all the ideas of integration, suggests that we have no differences, that we are the same, that there is no difference between Germany and Italy and France. And that to me seems to be a dangerous blurring of boundaries and a manic denial of the very different cultures we find within countries in Europe and between countries in Europe. I think the other question was really about whether there's another way out of the crisis. I don't know any other way. I don't know another way, so I can only say I can see one way, which would be an orderly agreement to revert to the original currencies of Europe. And the notion, the last point was the notion that the idea of the single currency was one as a kind of shortcut to integration, so to bring people together. And there are people in the integration movement who did believe that. We have one currency today, and tomorrow we will have one fiscal system, one tax system, one economic system, one education system, we'll get closer and closer. And I think the truth of the matter is that hasn't happened. I can't see it happening. The differences are much too big. The differences are even bigger now than they were in 1999 when the euro was created. And the reason why we didn't have full integration then, political, economic, social, cultural, fiscal, was because it was not possible, and it's still not possible today.
Ok, l'ultima traduzione, poi chiudiamo la mattinata.
Allora, per quanto riguarda il tema della negazione maniacale, secondo Mark Stein, se si pensa alle esperienze tremende di alcuni leader europei come Mitterrand e Kohl, successe tra l'altro quando loro erano giovani uomini, l'idea appunto di creare un'integrazione nella quale sostanzialmente si abbraccia il nemico negando la divisione, questo è sostanzialmente il tema della negazione maniacale per Stein. Diventare un'unica entità politica attraverso la creazione dell'euro rappresenta implicitamente questo, sostanzialmente la negazione maniacale. Ovvero esistono sentimenti di comunità, di rispetto, di amicizia reciproca nei paesi europei, ma la creazione dell'euro suggerisce qualcosa che va al di là di questo, ovvero quello che non esistono tra i paesi europei differenza, quindi questo è il tema della negazione maniacale. Per quanto riguarda la possibilità di uscire da questo impasse, da questi problemi, attraverso altre strade, oltre a quella dell'abbandono dell'euro, secondo lui non esistono. Secondo lui la strada è questa, quella di uscire in maniera graduale e molto attenta appunto dall'euro, tornando alle singole monete nazionali. È vero il tema di aver considerato la creazione dell'euro come una scorciatoia, come una semplificazione rispetto all'integrazione europea che era sicuramente la strada giusta, e molte persone l'hanno vista in questo modo. Però il fatto è che l'integrazione europea fin qui non si è realizzata, e soprattutto le divisioni che esistevano rispetto agli anni 90 si sono addirittura allargate. Quindi secondo lui l'integrazione attraverso l'euro non è una strada percorribile, bisognerebbe trovare altre strade. Per lui appunto è l'abbandono dell'euro, bisogna vedere se ce ne sono altre.
Bene, mi rendo conto che ci sono ancora tante domande che potrebbero essere fatte, ma avremo modo di riprendere molte delle cose che Mark ha detto questa mattina.